Welcome back, and thank you for staying with KTN Prime. Now let's dive into a conversation all about Katiba Week as we commemorate the anniversary, the 14th anniversary of the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution. With me, as I had earlier hinted, is Ochil Dudley, who's an advocate, partner at Bond Advocates LLP. Thank you so much and good evening. Thank you for coming. So let's get straight to it. 14 years down the line. Let's speak as a lawyer first.
Yeah.
Do you think we have done justice to this constitution as a country?
Well, the bits we've done justice to, like devolution, we've had the distance to hospital reduced in countries like Turkana, and those northern frontier counties. There were vast areas you could travel like 2 or 3 days without seeing an inch of tarmac. Now we have tarmac roads running through some of those places.
Yeah.
But then there are also counties which have wasted their promises, like a county close to mine called Homa Bay. The first 10 years lost. You can't see anything much. These are counties with very vast potential because they have a lake, they have very fertile soils, they have 2 seasons of rain, and you couldn't see much coming out of them.
Yeah,
but
counties someone may argue, sorry,
yeah?
Just to cut you short, someone may argue that, you know, the president has been on development tours, of course, in Nyanza region, and Homa Bay has been one of those counties that has benefited in terms of commissioning of projects.
Well, the things he's commissioned there, this time when he's there, and when he has been there previously. But I'm also speaking about the counties working the way they're meant to work, because these counties were meant to spur economic growth. So you have 47 different industrial systems coming up around the country so that we reduce this issue of joblessness. But we've had some of them devolve theft and corruption down there. So as it is at the national level, so is it at the county. National level seems to be stealing just a little bit much more than the counties. Speaking about the president and his development tours, well, we've seen plaques turning up around the country in ghost towns. So I can't really say much about that. But to answer your question, there are things we've got right around devolution. Some counties have shown us that had we had these from independence, had we sustained the Majimbo system, then maybe it would have been a different country. Others have shown us that it's possible to devolve corruption from the national level to the county level. Yeah.
And of course, today, Samburu governor was sentenced. The former Samburu governor, of course, was sentenced. But also, you know, when you talk about the fact that, yes, in some way, it is working for us, but also it's not working. How is it not working?
I think that the Constitution is working.
Okay.
We are yet to fully implement it, so we cannot enjoy its full potential. It's like a marriage where, you know, people have not brought in their best, and then they say the marriage is not working. The people saying we need to amend the Constitution, how do we amend a Constitution that we're yet to fully enforce? Something like Equalization Fund had a lifeline of 20 years, and Article should be 104. I could be wrong about that, but the Equalization Fund had a lifeline of 20 years, should be Article 204. We still have a bill in Parliament. It's called the Equalization Fund Administration Bill 2023. It's meant to help us implement the Equalization Fund. 20 years from 2010 when we had the Constitution takes us to 2030. So we have 6 years left of this fund. In short, we have not implemented that bit of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Chapter 6, we're yet to fully implement. And so that, for me, the calls to amend the Constitution should be resisted by the call to implement and not amend.
Okay.
Let us implement it first.
So, since implementation seems to be the problem, from where you sit, who do you think is dropping the ball?
The executive, number one, because straight off, we get a new constitution and the executive begins to re-centralize power. The first commission to die, for example, is the National Police Service Commission. Remember the time when they took a human head and placed it outside the gate of Kavuludi. And I think Kavuludi is the last name we remember as chair of the National Police Service Commission. I don't know if you know who the current chair is, yet that's a significant constitutional commission. I don't know who the current chair is, but they've tweaked the law in such a way that the Inspector General of Police, who is a member of the National Police Service Commission, can frustrate meetings. They've now written the law that, the Inspector General must be present for a meeting to proceed. And this is a commission that's meant, for example, to discipline police officers. We also needed to have an oversight board for the NIS under Section 66 of the NIS Act. They're yet to create that board, and maybe that's why we see some of these agencies, their officers misbehaving, running around youth who are peacefully and protesting unarmed instead of looking around trying to keep the country safe from real danger.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about devolution, because you brought it up earlier on. And of course, devolution is one of the fruits of the current constitution. And from where I sit, or from my understanding, it intended to bring governance closer to the people.
Yeah.
Yes, to some extent, you said we've felt it. To some extent, we have not. You've said the fact that, it's gotten to a point where devolution corruption has been devolved.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how best, especially from a law perspective, we can make it work. Because what Kenyans want is work done.
Okay. So if you look at the National Tax Expenditure Report, you'll find that the national government has waived some taxes for industrial capitalists up to about 393 billion. That's just 10 billion more than we give the counties in terms of the equal share, equitable share. Because we give the counties about 373, 380 billion. That amount of money can fund affordable healthcare, free for everyone in the country for about 3 years. In short, what I'm saying is that we are not giving the counties enough. If the national government can afford to waive tax for lobbyists, for friends of the administration, for campaigners, non-names, to that extent, 3% of GDP, 393 billion, exactly, just slightly more than we send to the counties, then you can tell for sure that we are not sending the counties enough.
Yeah.
And there's also something called the unbundling of functions, which is yet to be fully completed. We're supposed to list out the functions in the fourth schedule and then cost them so that we send the counties sufficient money for them to perform their functions. And then we've had these things like salary delays, or we send a little bit. We do not send enough. It's sent in arrears. So you have these tall projects coming up at the counties. I don't think that we've funded our devolved units enough, and we have not yet fully completed that issue of the transfer of functions.
President William Ruto has been on record multiple times saying, the government has intention to ensure that devolved functions are actually working, and that dispute between the national government and county government is solved. But we're yet to see the fruits of that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about these protests that occurred around June, July, that gave birth to a broad-based government.
Yeah.
Many say it is killing the spirit of multi-partism. Let's start with that, your point of view.
The broad-based government?
Yes.
Well, Ruto has never loved multi-partism, because on 18th of August 2022, just days after the elections, he calls members of Azimio, 7 members defect of UDM, the likes of the MP for Banisa, who's now died and has not been replaced a year down because we do not have IEBC.
Yeah.
Those 7 defect, and now UDA suddenly has the majority. It's called Kenya Kwanza.
Kenya Kwanza coalition, yes.
So it has the majority in parliament. So that co-option has always been there. It's nothing new. This is just an opportunity to effect it in a much better way. There's a court in case saying that Kenya Kwanza is not the majority party.
Yeah.
Because the majority party is decided on the date of the election. The results are declared, and from the results you can see which is the majority party. You can also see who has won the presidency, who's been elected governor of which place or senator. So the majority side is determined on the date of the election. And that co-option happened, people taking tea, I think in tents, in Karen and at State House, and now you do not have oversight in Parliament. And that's why people marched into Parliament, because Parliament seemed to do the will and wish of the president.
It's an appendage of the executive.
Yes, rather than representing the people.
Yeah.
And when you interfere with that kind of system, remember what I said about the constitutional commissions? All of them flattened, filled with political appointees, so they can no longer act as systems of safety. They can no longer act as pressure release valves for the constitution. Then you have people now dealing with pent-up injustices, things that could have been taken care of at Parliament, for example, or before these constitutional commissions.
Okay.
And now people have taken back their power directly.
Do you think when we were coming up with the 2010 Constitution, we ever envisioned a time when, for example, the government and the opposition will be in cahoots? Because you've seen this in the past 3 administrations, and it seems to be a trend, a worrying trend, many people say.
It's quite worrying because the Constitution is built to work in a certain way, everyone having their set functions, that system of separation of powers, but it also works with checks and balances. You need oversight in Parliament. But the current Parliament, and it's because of something called CDF. So Parliament uses CDF to blackmail the executive, and the executive uses CDF to blackmail Parliament.
Allegedly.
Not allegedly. We have it on the Hansard. MPs saying, no NGCDF, no budget. And when the executive also wants something to pass, they fund CDF, and MPs give them whatever they want. We have MPs on record saying, I voted for this bill because of the money I was given in NGCDF. So it's not allegedly. It gives a corrupt motive that weakens the oversight mechanism of Parliament, CDF.
Corruption seems to be a sore thorn amidst our lives, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it. Kenyans lack trust in our public institutions. So then how do we move forward as a country? Because that seems to be the question in majority of people's mind, you know, not just the older generation, but even the younger generation at this point.
Okay, I think that the beauty of this moment is that the Kenyan people have taken back their power, because under Article 1 of the Constitution, where it says sovereign power belongs to the people, and the people shall, that beautiful phrase they're now saying, some of that power is donated, but the rest of it the people retain, and they can exercise, they can petition public authorities, they can picket, they can demonstrate. And another thing that the Constitution has is this device of public participation, where people engage with the government, and I think that has now come true. We're now seeing public participation the way it was meant to be. People scrutinizing bills and knowing which bill is being debated, what is the deadline. I don't think that Parliament has to advertise anymore. Initially, they had to advertise for people to get the information. These days, you just see bills turning up on the timeline and people discussing them. And I think that's the way to keep the government in check. If the opposition has caved in, has been bought, then the people can still be the opposition. And they must pay allegiance to Morara, for example. Risked his life, spent his money, going around the country checking what's happening with our money. And is finding out amazing things that's happening with those stalled projects.
An eye-opener to Kenyans. But you know, today President William Ruto said elections losers will not go home empty-handed in the coming polls if that proposal of his is implemented. And that proposal, he's advocating for a win-win formula in elections.
If he's talking about amending the Constitution, then we must resist him, as we did Uhuru before him, and as we resisted his very unpopular Finance Bill 2024. Because this is a constitution that is not willing to implement. The chapter on corruption. I mean, the president fires some ministers, says that, for course, says that, you know, the trust of the Kenyan people are dead, and then he reappoints these same people weeks later, as if making a mockery of the people. The issue is not about amending the constitution. We have enough laws, and the constitution is also correctly in place. It is not yet fully amended. Fully implemented. Let him, first of all, try to implement it. You know, the Constitution also speaks about honesty and integrity. The president says, I'm going to reduce by half the number of advisors. Then he appoints more. A clear breach of Chapter 6. So for me, the issue is not about amending the Constitution. It is about implementing it.
Okay, but you know, all this anger that we're seeing from Kenyans, will it translate to the ballot? Because you see, majority of the times, Kenyans are known to forget easily. Come 2027, things will change.
You know, sometimes the benefit of having bad times or bad people in office or having repressive regimes is that they awaken the consciousness of the people. Some of the cases that we cite in court came to us from Uganda, for example. And Uganda has not had very friendly leadership in terms of relating with the people. Bobi Wine, is facing very tough times. So those repressive moments, those repressive regimes can give people a lot of fodder to develop, build better laws and have better outcomes. The worst would be if people lose this moment, if the movement fizzles out and they allow the politicians to co-opt the leaderships of the movement, for example.
Hasn't it at this point?
Well, you see people still engaging in projects. It's taking different turns. Obviously, the police brutality was excessive, and I hope that the police officers who are involved in that get held to account, no matter how long it takes, under the doctrine of command responsibility. I hope that not all of them escape. But the movement can sustain itself. People can keep engaging and vetting leadership so that when 2027 comes around, then they have the memory of this moment to work from. I hope that they do not let it go in vain.
Hope.
Yes.
Hope is the key word there. All right, let's talk about, of course, the issue of Article 81 of the Constitution, which mandates that no more than 2/3 of members of elective public bodies shall be of the same gender. This, we have seen it being talked about day in, day out. Nothing is yet to be done.
Well, I'm counsel to some parties in court over the issue, so I can't really say much about it.
Yes.
But even the Women's Charter that the president signed with the women of Kenya, I think that's the one that had free diapers. I mean, it seems as if we promise our women things in the Constitution, and then we don't give it to them.
Yeah.
So, yes, that is yet to be implemented. But I would also blame political parties, because political parties have the Political Parties Fund. And one of the functions of that fund is to promote the participation of women, of youth, of marginalized groups. So that if you had political parties giving us women candidates in the areas where those political parties are strong, then more of them would be elected. The likes of Millie Mabona, for example, from Homa Bay, or the ladies who got elected from Nakuru.
Yeah.
But the other thing that we need to watch out for is a deadline for boundaries review, which has lapsed.
It lapsed, yeah.
The promise to form IBC in a few days, we're also seeing that as one of the failed promises. They understand that there's a dispute within Azimio from the Wiper wing over who should be the representative of that. And it's holding up things because we have Magarini by-election.
A number of by-elections haven't been done, yes.
And so many of them in the county assemblies. And then the constitutional deadline has now lapsed.
So the president has reneged on some of the promises that he made.
I don't think he's so keen on them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But where does that leave us as a country?
Well, it leaves us in constitutional violations. It's a continuing constitutional violation. And I hope that situation is addressed soon.
Okay.
You can imagine if the way MPs have given themselves CDF and the way they I mean, the way representative democracy works. So you have the residents of Banisa who have had no MP for 1 year. What happens to them? Or Magarini, who are now doing about 4 or 5 months.
Okay. So many questions, but I don't think I have the right answers for those. Yeah. But let's talk about the issue of social justice, which has been betrayed by the political elite, if I can say that. Look at the issues of corruption scandals, high rate of unemployment. How do we solve this as a country, or fix the head and everything will automatically fall in place?
I think we need to fix the head, because we waste a lot of money in corruption. Those stalled projects, a lot of money is spent in them. And this is money that could be used spurring economic growth within the country. So that, the government has made it an official policy to export labor. And I heard the movement saying we want jobs here, not in Saudi Arabia. I think that budgeted corruption is where we waste a lot of our money. And people are saying, we have no problem raising these taxes if they're spent well. And so the call for accountability, for good governance, should give us a better country eventually, with job opportunities for our youth. Now education has become expensive, almost unaffordable, and then you finish that job and you have a degree. I've seen first-class degrees on the timeline. People saying, I've looked for a job for 6, 7 years. Yeah. There's no job. And that's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable is the key word. Okay, final thoughts even as we wind up. The Gen Zs have been advocating for a number of issues. It seems like at the moment it's divided between generations. The young generation want this, the older generation want that. We need to unite as a country in order to move forward. Your thinking, my thinking, and someone else's thinking put together will lift Kenya. But how do we do that? How do we get there? Do we have to do it only through protests? Are there any other avenues that we can use as Kenyans in order to perhaps advance the issue of good governance?
Okay, I think that the call for good governance is first of all a constitutional call, because it's Article 10 that tells us that we have certain values that govern us as a country. And so if we unite behind the Constitution, because I've seen people now reading the Constitution and it's written in very simple and easy language to understand. So if we have the Constitution at the front, then everything falls into place, because it's our basic law. It's the most important law. It's the law of all laws. And it tells us how everything should happen. It tells us the kind of leaders we need to have in place, how we need to elect those leaders, how those leaders should treat us, how we should treat those leaders when they go wrong. So I think that my final thoughts would be for Kenyans to unite behind the Constitution and to defend the Constitution. Then the Constitution can defend them and speak for them.
But we need to educate each other.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right, that's a really good place to end it. Thank you so much, Ochiel Dudley, an advocate and partner at Bond Advocates LLP. And that's where we wrap things up here on KTN Prime. Thank you so much for your company. As always, we don't take it for granted. I am Ashley Mazuri. Our sign language interpreter was Demian Evans. Have a good night.